In the remote Blue Ridge Mountains, widowed forest ranger Evelyn Hayes was about to uncover a chilling secret. What began as a quiet morning walk around her $50 cabin turned horrifying when her dog Boone unearthed a rusted locket and a tiny child's shoe beneath the old church bell. Evelyn wasn't an ordinary newcomer. Years in the wild had made her observant, resilient, and unflinchingly brave. Yet as she held the locket, she had no idea she was stepping into a mystery that would haunt Hollow Creek and transform her life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road to Hollow Creek narrowed the higher Evelyn Hayes drove, its edges swallowed by the dense blue-green shroud of pine and mist. The air thinned into a quiet that felt less like peace and more like held breath. Boone, her golden retriever, stood with his front paws braced against the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window. His ears twitched every few seconds, tracking sounds she couldn't hear. "Almost there, boy," Evelyn murmured, her voice rough from disuse. She had spoken little on the 4-hour drive from Richmond, content to let the hum of the truck and Boone's steady breathing fill the space. The cabin appeared suddenly through the trees, as if it had been waiting for her. Half buried in moss and shadow, it slumped beneath the weight of years. One shutter dangled by a single hinge. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired sigh. A narrow creek ran just behind it, threading through the valley like a quiet secret. Evelyn parked the truck and stepped out into the mountain air. Damp, cool, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and decay. Boone leapt down beside her, tail wagging cautiously as he sniffed the ground. She stood still for a moment, hands on her hips, and let her gaze sweep the property. It wasn't much, 2 acres of overgrowth, a leaning chimney, and what the realtor had optimistically called a historic structure. $50 had bought her solitude, not comfort. But solitude was all she'd come for. The Blue Ridge Mountains rose around her like a great cathedral. The silence pressed against her ears until she could hear her own pulse. "Home, I guess," she said softly. Boone barked once, sharp and echoing off the hills. The sound died quickly, as if the forest swallowed it whole. Inside, the cabin was worse than she expected. Dust thick as velvet coated the furniture, and cobwebs draped like lace across the corners. A mouse darted from beneath a rotted dresser. Yet there was a strange stillness here, not neglect exactly, more like something paused, waiting. Evelyn set to work with a ranger's practicality. She cleared debris, opened the windows, and coaxed a reluctant fire into the old stone hearth. Boone settled near the doorway, his amber eyes alert to every creak. By mid-afternoon, the place smelled faintly of cedar smoke and soap. Evelyn found herself studying an old photograph still nailed to the wall, a faded portrait of a family. The faces had been bleached nearly blank by sun and time, but she could make out a man in suspenders, a woman in a checkered dress, and 2 small children. She pulled the frame down and wiped the glass. The smaller child's outline, a girl, perhaps 5 or 6, looked back at her with an expression that might have been a smile. The feeling it gave her wasn't warmth, but ache. She set it face down on the table. Outside, the forest rustled, then went still again. Later, she drove into town for supplies. Hollow Creek was barely more than a crossroads. 1 gas station, a small grocery, a diner, and the Hollow Creek Inn with its peeling white sign. A few locals lingered on the porch of the general store, their conversation trailing off as Evelyn stepped inside. The store smelled of coffee and old wood. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. "Afternoon," Evelyn greeted, placing a few items, canned goods, nails, lamp oil, on the counter. "Afternoon," the woman replied, her eyes flicking toward the mud on Evelyn's boots. "New around here?" "Just bought the old cabin off Mill Road." The woman froze mid-scan. "That place still standing?" "Barely." Evelyn smiled. "Got it for $50. A chuckle rippled through the store from one of the men near the coffee machine. "You got robbed, lady." The woman behind the counter gave him a look sharp enough to silence him, then turned back to Evelyn. I'm Martha Whitlow. Been running this place since before most of these boys could walk. You say you bought the Hayes cabin? It was listed under the county trust, Evelyn said. They didn't know it had a name. Martha nodded slowly. Everything up that way's got a name, even the things that shouldn't, Evelyn frowned. Meaning? Martha's expression softened, almost apologetic. Just old talk, dear. That property's been empty near 50 years. Folks tend to leave it be. Evelyn signed her receipt. Guess I don't mind being left alone. Be careful what you wish for, Martha murmured, handing over the change. The mountain remembers things, especially what folks try to forget. The rain started as Evelyn wound her way back up the narrow road. By the time she reached the cabin, dusk had blurred the trees into a single dark mass. Boone jumped down before she could open the door fully, sniffing the air and whining low in his throat. What is it? She asked, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved but the mist. She unloaded her supplies quickly and lit the lantern. The fire from earlier still smoldered faintly, filling the room with a smoky warmth. Outside, the rain deepened into a steady drumbeat on the roof. Evelyn sat at the small table, her hands wrapped around a mug of instant coffee. She stared into the flames, letting the day's exhaustion settle. Somewhere beyond the cabin walls, an owl called, long, mournful, fading into the storm. For a while she felt almost at peace. Then she heard it, faint and distant, threading through the rain. A bell. Evelyn set down her mug and listened harder. The sound came again, low, hollow, metallic. 3 slow tolls. Her stomach tightened. There was no church within miles. She'd passed the only one in town that afternoon, its steeple leaning and silent. Boone lifted his head, ears pricked. A growl rumbled in his chest. Probably thunder, she whispered, though she knew it wasn't. The bell tolled again, closer this time. Evelyn rose and stepped to the window. The forest beyond was a grey blur of rain and shadow. Nothing moved, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by someone, but by the mountain itself. Her heart stopped. For a long moment she couldn't move. The forest was utterly still, even the wind gone. Only the whisper of snow falling filled the silence. Evelyn's voice trembled as she whispered, "Oh God, what did you find?" The lantern flickered again, and somewhere beyond the trees, something shifted. Watching, Ranger's growl deepened. The mountain, it seemed, had been waiting for her. The morning after Ranger's discovery, Pine Hollow Ridge looked almost beautiful in the early light. Every rooftop glazed in silver frost, every branch dipped in snow. But beauty on the mountain was always a mask. Beneath it lay silence, rot, and now something buried. Evelyn Carter stared at the disturbed patch of ground behind the church. The locket she'd found the night before dangled from her glove, its silver chain catching weak sunlight. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the small white curve beneath the snow. A child's skull, maybe. The thought hollowed her chest. Ranger stood near the spot, tail low, ears pricked toward the trees. He hadn't barked again, just watched. Waiting, Evelyn squatted and began brushing away the snow again, slower this time. She'd spent enough years as a nurse to know what human remains looked like. The bone she uncovered wasn't animal. It was small, delicate, and unmistakably human. Her stomach tightened. Oh, Lord. She leaned back on her heels, staring at the ground as realization sank in. Someone, maybe the little girl from the photographs, had died here, and whoever had lived in this village had left her buried behind the church. But why here? Why no marker, no grave? Her gloved hand trembled as she opened the locket again. The photo showed the same man and child she'd found nailed to the church door, but this copy was untouched by fire. Crisp, clear, unblemished. The man's expression wasn't one of joy. It was sorrowful, almost fearful. And the child, maybe 6 years old, clung to his leg. Her smile was faint, uncertain. Evelyn turned the locket over and found tiny initials scratched into the silver. C.H. 1912. She whispered the letters aloud. C.H. The sound vanished into the stillness. By mid-morning, she was pacing inside the cabin, the fire crackling in the stove. Her notebook lay open, filled with scrawled notes. Locket, CH, photo from early 1900s, likely pre-fire. Body buried behind church. Why unmarked? Why untouched? She rubbed her temples. The air felt heavier, colder. Every sound, the ticking stove, the wind through the boards, seemed louder, sharper. Ranger barked suddenly at the window. Evelyn's heart jumped. She crossed the room quickly and peered outside. At first she saw nothing, just the endless rows of black pines swaying under the weight of snow. Then movement, a flicker near the edge of the clearing. A figure, someone, or something, was watching from the trees. "Hey!" she shouted through the glass. "Who's there?" The figure stepped back. For a heartbeat, Evelyn caught a glimpse of a long coat, maybe brown or grey. Then it was gone. She grabbed her rifle from beside the door, a battered Winchester she'd bought from a pawn shop on her way north. Ranger was already growling low, tail stiff. Evelyn threw on her coat and pushed into the snow. "Stay close." "Boy!" The cold knifed through her lungs as she trudged toward the tree line. Eyes darting across the forest shadows. Nothing, just branches creaking in the wind, but then footprints. Fresh ones, deep, human-shaped, leading away from the clearing. Her pulse quickened. No tire tracks, no other signs of life for miles. Who else could be up here? She followed the prints for a few yards before they ended abruptly, as if the person had vanished mid-step. No turn, no drag, no sign of running. Ranger whined, circling the spot. His paw brushed against something half-buried, a wooden sign, its paint faded and letters carved crudely by hand. Evelyn bent and brushed off the snow, her breath hitched. Harper, the initials on the locket, CH. Maybe Clara Harper. The pieces began to twist in her mind, forming something darker. She turned to head back toward her own cabin and froze. Smoke, thin black smoke rising from her chimney. But she hadn't lit the fire. Evelyn broke into a run, boots pounding through snow. Ranger raced beside her, barking wildly. As the cabin came into view, she saw it. The door slightly open, a curl of smoke spilling out. She gripped the rifle tighter and pushed the door wide. The fire was roaring, but not in the stove. Someone had lit a pile of old furniture in the center of the room. Flames climbed the walls, licking toward the ceiling. Heat blasted her face as she dropped the rifle and grabbed a blanket, beating the flames down with desperate force. Ranger barked and pulled at her sleeve, dragging her toward the door. Smoke stung her eyes, choking her lungs. Finally, she stumbled outside, coughing violently into the snow. It took her 10 minutes to smother the last embers. Her blankets were ruined, her supplies scorched. The air stank of burnt wood and oil. She sank to her knees beside the wreckage, trembling. Someone had been inside her cabin. Someone had tried to burn her out. She stared at the forest again, but it only stared back, silent, indifferent. Somewhere out there something was moving, something that didn't want her here. By afternoon the wind had died, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness. Evelyn sat by the ruined hearth, her notebook open again. The page trembled beneath her pen. Harper family, possibly buried here. Child's body confirmed. Someone still on the mountain, watching, trying to scare me off. But why now? Ranger rested against her legs, eyes fixed on the door. Every creak in the wood made his ears twitch. Evelyn exhaled shakily. "I'm not leaving, you hear me?" she said aloud. Maybe to the air, maybe to herself. I didn't come all this way to run from ghosts. But even as she said it, the shadows seemed to shift again, stretching longer across the floor. She stood, went to the window, and froze. Across the clearing in the fading light, someone had placed something on the church steps. A child's toy, a small wooden horse. Carved crudely, its paint faded but intact. The snow around it was untouched, as if it had appeared there without footprints. Ranger growled low in his throat, hackles raised. "I don't believe in curses," Evelyn said softly. "But if a child disappeared, someone should have done something." Martha's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "Someone did, just not enough." She slid the locket back across the counter without touching it. "You take that to Sheriff Granger. Tell him I sent you." The sheriff's office sat across from the feed store, a squat building with a single cruiser parked out front. Sheriff Dale Granger was a broad-shouldered man with lines etched deep from both sun and worry. He looked up from his desk as Evelyn entered. "Afternoon, ma'am. What can I do for you?" She introduced herself, explaining about the locket, the shoe, Martha's reaction. Granger listened without interrupting, his weathered face unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back slowly in his chair. $50 cabin, huh? That'd be the Ross property before it burned? Haven't had anyone fool enough to live up there since. Evelyn bristled. "I don't scare easy, Sheriff. I can see that." He took the locket, turning it under the light. His thumb brushed the inscription. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped low. "You said Martha recognized this?" "She did. Said the name Lydia Cole meant something." Granger exhaled through his nose, then stood and walked to the window. Outside, the mist was lifting, revealing the full sweep of the valley. "My daddy was sheriff when that girl went missing," he said finally. "I was a boy then, but I remember the search parties. Found nothing but one shoe, I think. Same kind as this." He looked back at her, eyes hardening. "I'll tell you the same thing he told everyone who went digging where they shouldn't. The mountain takes what it wants, and it don't give it back." Evelyn met his stare evenly. "You believe that?" He hesitated. "I believe there's peace in leaving some things alone, but if that peace is built on lies..." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "Then those lies are holding up half this town. You stir them, you'd better be ready for what comes out." By dusk, Evelyn was back at the cabin. The storm had left puddles across the yard, mirrors of dull grey sky. She'd left the locket on the table inside, but as the sun sank, she found herself drawn to it again. She turned it over in her palm, tracing the engraved flowers. Boone lay near the hearth, tail twitching in uneasy dreams. "Lydia Cole," Evelyn murmured aloud. "What happened to you, little one?" A faint sound answered her question, distant, almost imagined. "Bells." She froze, heart thudding. The sound drifted through the open window, soft and metallic, carrying across the valley. Boone shot to his feet, growling low. "There's no church for miles," she whispered. The wind shifted suddenly, slamming the shutters against the frame. The fire sputtered. Evelyn grabbed her flashlight and stepped onto the porch. The night was ink-black, the trees whispering restlessly. Boone padded beside her, muscles tense. The bell sound came again, 3 notes, slow and mournful. It seemed to rise from the hollow below, near where Boone had dug that morning. Her beam of light swept across the clearing. Nothing, only rain-slick grass and the old bell glinting faintly under the moonlight. "See? Nothing there," she said, voice tight. Boone didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the bell. Then slowly, his ears went back and he began to whine, tail tucked. Evelyn followed his stare. For an instant, no more than a heartbeat, she thought she saw a small figure standing beside the bell. A child's shape, pale and motionless, hair stirring though no wind blew. Then it was gone. The bell gave one last hollow toll, and silence swallowed the valley whole. Sleep was impossible. Evelyn lay awake, the storm's after-hum still vibrating in her bones. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were not her own. She was standing in the forest again, barefoot, the earth cold beneath her feet. Boone was gone. The air shimmered faintly like heat above a flame. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A girl stood ahead of her, a child in an old-fashioned dress, white now grey with age. She turned, her face shadowed, and Evelyn saw the locket glint at her throat. "Help me," the girl whispered. Evelyn tried to step forward, but the ground turned to ash under her feet. The trees around her burned silently, the air thick with the smell of smoke. Her husband's fire, her guilt, all of it colliding with this dream. "Help me." The voice came again, smaller, fading. "They forgot me." Evelyn woke with a cry, heart hammering. The cabin was dark, save for the glow of dying embers. Boone sat by the door, staring out into the night, whining softly. His paw scratched at the wood once, twice, 3 times. "What is it, boy?" she whispered. He looked back at her, eyes reflecting the flickering firelight, and in them she swore she saw something else. A reflection not of herself, but of a small figure standing just outside the door. Evelyn rose slowly, every nerve taut. Her hand reached for the latch. Outside, the forest waited, still as prayer. Morning came grey and hollow. Evelyn brewed coffee with shaking hands. She should leave, she thought. Pack the truck and drive back down the ridge before the weather turned again. Before she started seeing things, but something in her refused. The same part of her that had once fought wildfires, side by side with men twice. Her size, the same part that had refused to abandon her husband's. Memory even after the flames took him. She couldn't turn away from this. Not now. She knelt beside Boone, running a hand over his fur. "We're not done here, are we?" He thumped his tail once, but his gaze drifted to the window, where the bell's silhouette loomed against the fog. Evelyn stood and grabbed her jacket. "Come on, boy. Let's go see Martha again." Because if the mountain had a story to tell, Evelyn Hayes was going to listen, no matter how deep she had to dig. And somewhere in the trees behind her, a faint echo answered, carried on the morning wind, a single mournful toll of the bell. The mist rolled down from the ridge like a living thing, swallowing the road before Evelyn's truck could climb it. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, fighting to clear a fog that wasn't entirely natural. Boone pressed his snout to the glass, ears twitching as if he could hear something she couldn't. "Almost there," Evelyn muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. When the outline of the Hollow Creek Inn appeared through the haze, it felt like a lifeline. Martha Whitlow was sweeping the porch, her apron tied neat over her cardigan, despite the damp air. She looked up as Evelyn pulled in, her expression tightening before Evelyn even stepped out. "You shouldn't be up here again this soon," Martha called, leaning on her broom. "The ridge has a way of holding folks once it gets their scent." Evelyn gave a weary smile. "Then it's already got mine." Inside, the inn smelled of cedar and old paper. Evelyn sat at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee, while Boone lay quietly at her feet. The old woman finally joined her. Lowering herself into the chair opposite, "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." Evelyn told her everything, the bell that rang when no one was near it, the figure by the tree line, the dream of the little girl whispering, "Help me." When she finished, Martha was very still. Then she said softly, "You saw her." Evelyn frowned. "You believe me?" "I believe the mountain keeps its memories. Some kinder than others. Who was Lydia Cole, really?" Evelyn asked. "You said she disappeared, but that can't be the whole story." Martha hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her teacup. "There are stories, Mrs. Hayes. Most folks don't repeat them. 50 years back, Hollow Creek wasn't the quiet place you see now. It was a mining town, coal mostly, though they pulled iron from the ridge too. Men worked under the Cole family. Jacob Cole owned half the land, and his word was law." Evelyn leaned forward. "Lydia was his daughter." Martha nodded. "Pretty little thing. Her mother died birthing her, and Jacob raised her alone. Folks said he doted on her something fierce. But one summer, there was an accident in the mine. A cave-in. 6 men never came back. The company blamed unstable rock. The families blamed Jacob." Her eyes drifted toward the window, to where the fog pressed against the glass like breath. "Not long after Lydia vanished. They searched the woods, the church, every creek bed. All they found was her shoe near the bell, like the one you found. After that, people started hearing things. Bells at night. A girl crying in the trees. Then the fires started. Fires! The church burned first, then the coal house. Jacob himself disappeared soon after. Folks said the ridge took him, same as his daughter." Evelyn's skin prickled. "And no one ever investigated. Sheriff Granger's daddy did what he could, but the mountains don't give up their dead easy." By the time the smoke cleared, the town had already decided it was better to forget. Evelyn looked down at the locket she'd brought again, still rusted, still cold. "I can't forget," she said. "She came to me, Martha. She's trying to tell me something." Martha's gaze softened with something that looked like pity. "Be careful what you listen to, child. Some voices call for help. Others just want company." The rain began again by the time Evelyn drove back up the ridge. The road twisted like an old scar through the forest, and every mile felt lonelier than the last. When she reached the cabin, the world was already twilight. She lit a lantern and placed the locket on the table beside an old map she'd found in a drawer the night before. A hand-drawn survey of the property dated 1899. Faded ink marked the stream, the church, the ridge trail, and several rectangles labeled mine entrances. "Boone," she said softly, tracing her finger along one faint line leading west of the bell site. "Entrance C, if the mine was near there." Boone whined, tail thumping once. Evelyn grabbed her flashlight, raincoat, and a coil of rope from the truck. The air outside was colder than before, the fog thicker. She made her way toward the bell, its outline half swallowed by the mist. The earth still bore the scar of her earlier digging. The ground sloped downward behind the ruins, leading into a tangle of ferns and slick roots. She followed it, her beam cutting through the dark, until it caught on something metallic, a rusted sign half buried in moss. Coal Mining Co. Entrance. See, the door to the mine was a slab of warped timber nailed across a black mouth of earth. Most of the planks had rotted, leaving gaps wide enough to squeeze through. The air that leaked out was heavy and cold, tinged with the sharp tang of rust. "Stay close," she murmured to Boone, ducking inside. The tunnel smelled of old iron and decay. Her flashlight beam jittered across rough walls, revealing pick marks, ancient timbers, and the collapsed remains of a cart. Water dripped steadily from above, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. Halfway in, Boone stopped. His ears perked. Then faintly, so faintly she thought she imagined it, came the sound of singing, a child's voice. High, pure, drifting through the dark, Evelyn froze. Her breath fogged the air. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. The singing stopped. Something moved deeper in the tunnel. A flicker of light, pale bluish, bloomed for a second, then vanished. Boone growled. Evelyn's hand shook as she tightened her grip on the flashlight. Against all reason, she kept walking. The tunnel widened into a small cavern. The walls glistened with moisture. At the center stood an old wooden crate, half collapsed, covered in mildew. Beneath it lay a scatter of bones, small bones. Her knees went weak. The beam of her flashlight trembled across a tiny skull, a tangle of decayed cloth, and something glinting faintly in the dirt, a second locket, identical to the one she'd found, but newer, less rusted. Evelyn sank to her knees. Tears burned her eyes. "Oh, Lydia," she whispered. A whisper answered her. Not from behind, not from the tunnel, from the walls themselves. "He buried me here." The air turned frigid. Boone barked sharply, then whimpered, backing toward the entrance. The light in Evelyn's hand flickered. "Who?" she choked. "Who did this to you?" "He made me quiet," the voice said. No louder than breath, yet it filled the cavern. "When I told what I saw." Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. "What did you see?" There was a pause, then the faintest sound, a bell toll so soft it could have been memory. Then her flashlight died. The darkness was absolute. She could feel it pressing against her skin, dense and alive. Something brushed her shoulder, small, cold fingers. Evelyn stumbled back, gasping. "Lydia?" The fingers withdrew. The air shifted. Then faintly from behind her, Boone barked again, a desperate, echoing sound, and she caught the glint of his eyes in the dark. She ran. The tunnel seemed longer on the way out, twisting impossibly, as though the mine itself didn't want to let her go. Roots snagged her coat. The air grew tighter, and behind her came the soft patter of footsteps too light to be her own. When she burst into the open air, the fog swallowed her whole. She dropped to her knees, gasping, clutching the second locket in her fist. Boone circled her anxiously, licking her hand. "It's real," she whispered. "She's really there." That night Evelyn couldn't light a fire. The wood refused to catch, as though the damp air itself fought against warmth. She sat wrapped in a blanket, staring at both lockets on the table. The second one had initials scratched faintly inside, J.C. Jacob Cole. Her stomach twisted. "He did it," she whispered. Her own father. But why? She turned to her notebook, scribbling everything she'd learned. Lydia disappeared after mine accident. 6 miners dead. Lydia saw something. Jacob Cole buried her near the mine. But as she wrote, another thought crept in. The fires, the church, the house, the ridge. If Jacob Cole died, how? And why did the fires stop only after? The cabin creaked. The lamp flickered. Boone lifted his head, ears pricking. Then came a faint sound outside, the crunch of footsteps on wet leaves. Evelyn grabbed the lantern and moved to the door. Through the thin pane she saw movement, a shape standing at the edge of the clearing, not a child this time. A man. He wore a long coat, hat pulled low. She couldn't make out his face, but he was watching her. Evelyn's breath fogged the glass. "Hello?" The figure didn't move. Then slowly it raised a hand and pointed toward the old bell. Evelyn's stomach dropped. When she blinked, he was gone. The next morning she drove straight to the sheriff's office. Granger was outside loading feed into his truck. He looked up as she pulled in, his jaw tightening. "Mrs. Hayes, I found something," she said, thrusting the second locket at him. "In the old mine behind the ridge. There are bones down there, Sheriff." "A child's bones." His expression didn't change. "You sure?" "I know what I saw." He took the locket, turned it over, saw the initials. His shoulders sagged. "Lord help us." "You knew," Evelyn said quietly. Granger looked away. "My daddy did. Said the town didn't need another ghost. Said it was mercy to let it lie. Mercy." She snapped. She was 6. He met her eyes then, pain carved deep in his features. "You think I don't know that? But if we dug it up then, the whole mountain would have burned again. There's old gas in those shafts. One spark and you'd have another firestorm like 72. That's how the Coles died. That's how the ridge was sealed." Evelyn stared at him, realization dawning. They didn't disappear. "They burned in their own house, didn't they?" He nodded slowly. "Jacob built that house right over another shaft. Thought he could wall off his sins. The fire took him, his wife, everything. All except that church bell. That's why it rings. Metal remembers." Evelyn swallowed hard. "Then Lydia's spirit, she's not at peace." "No," Granger said softly, "and maybe she never will be. But if you go stirring it again, she won't be the only one screaming in that hollow." That night the fog came early. The bell rang again, clear, sharp, closer than before. Evelyn stood on her porch, the lockets clutched together in her fist. Boone growled low beside her. In the distance, fireflies rose over the ridge, but the light they gave off wasn't golden. It was pale blue, the same color she'd seen in the mine, the same color as Lydia's eyes in her dream. "Show me," she whispered into the mist. "Show me what they did." The bell tolled once. Then the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint, sorrowful echo of a child's voice. "Follow." And Evelyn did. The fog had not lifted for 3 days. It clung to the valley like a living thing, smothering the light and dulling the edges of the forest. Evelyn stood on the porch of her cabin. Boone pressed against her leg, watching the gray tendrils slide between the trees. The bell hadn't tolled since that night, but the silence felt heavier because of it, as if the mountain were holding its breath. Inside, the locket sat open on the kitchen table beside her coffee mug. Lydia's photograph stared back at her, no bigger than a thumbnail, her face soft and innocent, her eyes too bright for the black and white grain. Evelyn had wiped away the grime days ago, only to reveal that the back was engraved with faint initials, J.C. Jacob Cole, the name the sheriff had mumbled under his breath before changing the subject. The air in the cabin had changed, colder, heavier. Boone paced near the door, growling softly. Then from the far corner came a whisper. Not the wind, not the creak of the floorboards, a voice. "You found me." Evelyn froze. "Lydia." The candle flickered violently. A figure coalesced by the hearth, thin, translucent, the outline of a young girl with long hair and hollow eyes. "The same eyes from the photograph. He didn't mean to," the ghost whispered. "He wanted to hide me until morning, but the water was cold, and I stopped fighting." Evelyn swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. "Who, Jacob?" The ghost nodded slowly. "He came back, tried to dig me out. The ground gave way. He fell. They buried us both when the earth came down. A silence hung between them, thick with centuries of grief. Evelyn's breath hitched. Why me? Why show me this? Because you listen. The ghost's form flickered, fading toward the door. The creek still runs red when the fog is heavy. Follow it. Finish it. Then she was gone. Evelyn didn't wait for dawn. She followed the ridge down through the trees, guided only by the beam of her flashlight and Boone's growls. The fog was so thick, it seemed to close behind her like a curtain. Somewhere ahead, water gurgled softly. When she reached the creek, she saw it, rusted iron jutting from the bank, tangled with roots. An old wheel from a timber mill half buried in mud. She knelt, shining her light into the water. Beneath the current, a pale shape lay trapped beneath a sheet of stone. A skull. And beside it, a second, smaller. She staggered back. Boone barked sharply, hackles raised. That's when the ground trembled. The creek bed shifted, and from the darkness rose a shape of a man. Tattered clothing. Bones jutting through mud, his hollow sockets fixed on her. The remains of Jacob Cole. For a heartbeat she couldn't move. Then the apparition lifted his hand, not in threat but in pleading. Tell them, his voice rasped through the wind. Tell them I tried. Evelyn stumbled backward, clutching the lockets. I will, she whispered. I swear it. The figure dissolved, sinking back into the earth as the water surged around her boots. By the time she returned to her cabin, dawn's first light was bleeding through the fog. The mountain seemed calmer now, the silence no longer heavy but restful. Evelyn placed both lockets on the table and wrote one final line in her notebook, The mountain remembers. But now it rests. She closed the book, fed the fire, and sat with Boone until the warmth returned to her fingers. Somewhere in the distance, the bell rang one last time, soft, almost gentle, like a sigh through the trees, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn Hayes smiled. The morning after the storm broke across Hollow Creek, the valley woke to silence. The fog had burned away, leaving the forest washed in clean gold light. Evelyn hadn't slept. She sat at her kitchen table, a blanket draped over her shoulders, both lockets resting side by side before her. Their matching chains gleamed faintly, no longer dull with grime, but glistening as if newly polished. Boone lay curled beside the hearth, twitching in uneasy dreams Evelyn had written through the night, her notebook filled with pages of notes, sketches, and a rough map of the ridge. Every detail of Lydia's final hours was there, the letters, the lantern, the second grave beneath the creek bed. But one question still gnawed at her. Why did no one ever find them? The sheriff had to know something. 50 years of silence didn't happen by accident. She dressed, slipped both lockets into her pocket, and drove into town as the sun climbed over the peaks. Sheriff Granger was already waiting when she arrived. His cruiser sat parked outside the Hollow Creek diner, engine idling, his broad frame hunched over a cup of coffee at the counter. The moment she walked in, his eyes flicked up, tired, resigned. You found something, he said before she could even sit down. Evelyn didn't answer at first. She laid the lockets on the counter between them. One still stained with old blood, the other cleaned and whole. The sheriff's jaw clenched. Lord above. They were buried up near the old bell tower, she said quietly. I also found a note, Jacob's confession. He tried to move Lydia after she died. The ground collapsed. He must have fallen with her. Granger's hand went to his mouth, trembling. For the first time, he didn't look like a man of law, but a man burdened by ghosts. I was a boy when it happened, he said at last. My daddy was deputy back then. He and Sheriff Cole, Jacob's father, found the girl's shawl by the creek. Everyone knew Jacob was mixed up with her, but his daddy was the kind that didn't let the law near his family. Evelyn's stomach turned. He covered it up. He made them seal the case as a runaway. Granger's voice cracked. Said it'd ruin the town if word got out. Next thing you know, the company folded, the mine closed, and half the valley moved away. My daddy didn't speak of it again, but I heard him at night talking to himself. The mountain'll make us pay, he used to say. Evelyn leaned forward. Maybe it already did. The sheriff looked out the window toward the distant ridge. You think the girl's still out there? She's not just out there, Evelyn said softly. She's waiting. By noon, 2 deputies, a county coroner, and Sheriff Granger stood on the banks of Hollow Creek. Evelyn guided them to the spot she'd marked the night before, where the wheel of the old timber mill jutted from the mud. The air smelled of wet leaves and rust. They began digging. The sound of shovels striking earth echoed through the hollow, rhythmic and grim. Boone barked once, then sat back, ears pinned. After an hour, one of the deputies stopped. "Got something here, Sheriff." They cleared the soil carefully. A shape emerged, small, delicate bones wrapped in tatters of cloth, a rusted crucifix still clinging to the ribcage. Beside it lay another skeleton, larger, its arms stretched protectively over the smaller frame. Lydia and Jacob. The coroner knelt, murmuring a prayer. Granger removed his hat. 50 years, he whispered. And all this time, she was right here. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes, but she stayed silent. The wind had picked up soft and steady, rustling the trees. For a moment, she could swear it carried a whisper. "Thank you." They lifted the remains with care. The coroner placed them side by side in linen shrouds, marked with tags, ready for transport to the county morgue. But as they prepared to leave, the earth trembled again, just faintly. A low, distant rumble rolled through the valley like thunder from beneath the ground. The sheriff turned. "You feel that?" Evelyn nodded. The mountains breathing. That night the town gathered by the old church ruins. Word had spread quickly. After half a century, the girl from Hollow Creek had finally been found. Lanterns glowed among the pines, casting gold circles through the fog that drifted down from the ridge. Evelyn stood beside Martha Whitlow, who clutched her shawl tight. "Never thought I'd live to see this day," the old woman murmured. Sheriff Granger stepped forward, hat in hand. "These woods hold our history," he said. "Good and bad. We've been living with ghosts we never faced. Tonight, we set them free." The crowd bowed their heads as a prayer was said. Then from the mist came a sound so clear and mournful it froze every soul in place. The bell. 3 slow, perfect chimes. The broken bell that lay split and rusted on the ridge. People gasped, crossing themselves, eyes wide. Evelyn didn't move. She just listened. And in that sound, she heard not terror, but release, like the sigh of a child finally at rest. When the bell fell silent, the wind stirred, carrying a faint scent of wildflowers from the ridge. Boone lifted his head and barked once, softly, almost joyfully. Martha whispered, "The mountain's forgiven." Days passed. The county sent officials to examine the site, to verify the remains and archive the case. They confirmed Lydia Cole's identity from the locket, the photograph, and the letters. Jacob's death was ruled accidental. There were no charges to bring, no living suspects to blame, only history to be recorded. But Hollow Creek changed. People began returning, descendants of the families who'd left decades ago. A small cafe reopened by the crossroads, and children played again where weeds had once grown wild. The old bell tower stones were gathered and stacked neatly into a memorial. Evelyn watched from her porch as the world crept back into the valley. She'd meant to leave after the investigation, but something rooted her there. She fixed up the cabin, tended the garden, and hiked the ridge every morning. Sometimes she swore she heard laughter in the wind, soft, childlike, free. Then one evening, while cleaning out the old desk she'd salvaged from the shed, she found an envelope wedged behind a drawer. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the name was still legible. For Lydia. Evelyn unfolded it carefully. Inside was a short note, written in a woman's elegant hand. "My darling girl, if you ever feel alone, listen for the bell. It will lead you home. Love, Mother." Evelyn sat back, the letter trembling in her hand. The bell, always the bell. Not a curse, a call. She tucked the letter into her journal and added a final page to her notes. The mountain never forgot her. It only waited for someone who would listen. Winter came early that year. Snow fell thick across the valley, muting every sound, softening the shapes of roofs and trees. Evelyn walked daily to the memorial, where 2 small wooden crosses stood side by side beneath the pines. Someone, Martha likely, had left wildflowers frozen in a jar between them. She knelt, brushing the snow from the names carved into the wood. Lydia Cole, 1956-1972. Jacob Cole, 1941-1972. "Sleep well," she whispered. The wind stirred the branches above her. No voices this time, no tolling bell, just peace. Boone wagged his tail, pressing against her side. As she rose to leave, she caught a glint through the trees, a figure standing by the ridge, pale in the snowlight. A girl in a simple dress, hair drifting like mist. Lydia smiled, lifted her hand in silent farewell, and vanished with the next gust of wind. Evelyn felt warmth flood her chest, a gentle ache of gratitude. She turned back toward the cabin, her boots crunching softly through the snow. Months later, a local reporter came knocking, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "is it true you bought that cabin for $50? Evelyn smiled faintly. "That's right. $50 and a dream," the reporter chuckled. "You realize that's going to make one hell of a headline." She looked past him, toward the ridge where the bell tower once stood. Sunlight slanted through the trees, painting gold over the snow. "It wasn't the cabin I bought," she said softly. "It was the story waiting to be told." He blinked, puzzled. "And what story is that?" Evelyn's smile deepened. "That even the quietest places have a voice if you're willing to listen." When he left, she sat by the window with her coffee, Boone curled at her feet. The valley below shimmered in the winter sun, alive again, free of its shadow. From somewhere far off, perhaps just memory, perhaps not, she heard one final chime of the bell, not mourning, not warning, simply home, and for the first time since her husband's death, Evelyn Hayes felt truly at peace. Spring came early to the Blue Ridge that year. The snow melted in silvery rivulets, feeding the creeks that wound like veins through Hollow Creek Valley. Wild violets pushed through the thawed earth, and the air was filled with the scent of pine and rain. The mountains, once somber and gray, breathed again. Alive, forgiving, Evelyn stood on the porch of her cabin, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Boone lay beside her, older now, his muzzle touched with white. The cabin had changed since she'd bought it. New paint, repaired shutters, flower boxes beneath the windows. It was no longer a place of escape, but of belonging. A car engine hummed along the dirt road. Evelyn turned to see a dusty sedan pulling up by the gate. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, carrying a leather satchel and a bouquet of fresh daisies. She looked nervous, scanning the trees before meeting Evelyn's gaze. "Mrs. Hayes?" she called. Evelyn nodded. "That's me," the woman smiled shyly. "My name's Caroline Cole. Lydia was my aunt." They sat together in the kitchen, sunlight pooling across the table where 2 cups of tea steamed between them. Caroline traced her finger over the lockets that lay side by side, her eyes shining with emotion. "I never met her," Caroline said softly. "My father was born years after she died. He told me almost nothing, just that she'd gone away. When I read about what you found, I knew I had to come." Evelyn listened quietly. She'd met journalists, historians, even a pair of ghost hunters since the story broke, but none had felt as meaningful as this visit. "I wanted to thank you," Caroline continued. "You gave her a voice again. You gave us a truth we didn't know we were missing." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I didn't find her alone. She led me to her." Caroline blinked, uncertain. "You mean figuratively?" Evelyn hesitated, then said simply, "Yes, figuratively." But in her heart, she knew better. Caroline placed the daisies on the table. These were her favorite flowers, according to my grandmother's journal. She used to pick them by the ridge when she was little. I thought maybe they belonged here. "They do," Evelyn said warmly. "The ridge is hers again." That evening, Evelyn hiked to the memorial one last time. The air was still and soft, full of birdsong and the distant rush of water. She carried a folded letter in her hand, sealed with wax. At the foot of the 2 wooden crosses, she knelt, brushing away the new spring moss. Boone lay down beside her, panting lightly. She read the letter aloud. "To Lydia and Jacob, the mountain remembers you now, not as ghosts, but as part of its roots and wind. I've seen the valley wake from silence because of you. I hope you found each other again, wherever you are. Thank you for trusting me to listen. Evelyn Hayes." She buried the letter beneath a stone, beside the lockets she'd finally decided to return to the earth. Then she stood, watching the sunlight scatter through the leaves, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw them, two faint figures at the edge of the clearing. Lydia, hand in hand with the man who once sought her forgiveness. Both smiling, both free, the wind whispered through the branches, a voice softer than memory. Home. Weeks passed. Life in Hollow Creek found its rhythm again. The cafe near the crossroads was busy on weekends, the laughter of children echoing off the hills. The old church ruins were cleaned and fenced, with a bronze plaque installed by the county. It read simply, Hollow Creek Memorial, 1972. In memory of Lydia and Jacob Cole, and of all who rest in the mountains' keeping. Tourists came and went. Reporters wrote their stories. But for Evelyn, it wasn't about headlines. It was about peace, the kind that comes after storms, quiet and complete. On warm evenings, she would sit on her porch, Boone asleep beside her, and listen to the world exhale. Sometimes, when the wind turned just right, a faint chime would drift through the valley. Not from metal or wind, but something older, deeper. She no longer feared it. She would smile, close her eyes and whisper, "Good night." Lydia. Years later, long after the valley had become a small community once more, hikers passing through Hollow Creek would sometimes speak of the bell, how it could be heard faintly through the fog, a sound like laughter hidden in the wind. Locals said it was just the way the breeze moved through the stones. Others said it was the mountains' way of welcoming travelers home, but those who knew the story, the real one, never tried to explain it. They simply nodded and smiled and let the mystery live, for the mountains of Virginia hold their secrets gently in the folds of time and soil. And somewhere beneath that quiet earth, two souls finally rest. Their silence no longer a burden but a song. Evelyn Hayes, the woman who bought a $50 cabin to escape her grief, had given a valley its voice again, and the mountain in return gave her peace. The dawn crept pale and uncertain across Hollow Creek. Mist curled low over the charred ruins of the church, wrapping the world in quiet grief. Evelyn stood among the smoking timbers, her body trembling from exhaustion and cold. Boone sat beside her, one paw resting on her boot, watching her with steady eyes, a silent anchor in the storm of her thoughts. The sheriff's men had come before sunrise, drawn by the glow of fire. They worked in grim silence, stamping out embers, hauling water from the well. Sheriff Granger found Evelyn sitting at the stone steps, her face streaked with soot and tears. He didn't speak for a long time, just handed her a flask and let her breathe. Was it worth it? He asked finally, his voice low. Evelyn nodded. She's free now. Granger looked toward the blackened bell tower. You saw her? Evelyn's throat tightened. I did. She wasn't angry, just waiting for someone to remember. The sheriff knelt beside her, his knees creaking. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Back when this place was still a village, my grandfather was deputy here. He told stories about a child who went missing and a man who hanged himself in the woods soon after. Said the preacher called it the devil's work. They buried the truth because it was easier that way. Evelyn glanced up. You knew? I knew pieces, he said quietly, but I never believed them. Until now, the flames had revealed what time had buried. When the old floorboards collapsed, they uncovered bones, small, fragile, clutched together in the earth beneath the altar. Lydia Cole and her brother Jacob. Evelyn had fallen to her knees when she saw them. Their locket still glimmered faintly in the ash, half melted but intact, like a final echo of their bond. They were locked in, Evelyn whispered, trapped under the church when it burned the first time. Someone hid them there. Granger's jaw tightened. Preacher Cole. He claimed the fire was an act of God. But it was him. He killed his own children, afraid they'd reveal his sins. My grandfather found his journal years later but burned it, said some things were better left forgotten. Evelyn stared into the rising sun, the light piercing through smoke. That's what this mountain does. It keeps secrets until someone listens. Boone let out a low whine. Evelyn scratched behind his ear absently, her eyes on the horizon. She could almost feel Lydia's presence still, faint, gentle, like the brush of wind through pine needles. That night, she stayed at the cabin. The silence was no longer heavy or watchful. It felt like rest. She built a small fire in the hearth and placed the half-melted locket on the mantel. For the first time since moving to Hollow Creek, she didn't lock the door. Later, as she drifted toward sleep, Boone lifted his head. His ears twitched. Evelyn opened her eyes. The bell, or what remained of it, gave a faint metallic sigh in the distance. But it wasn't ominous this time. It was soft, almost like a farewell. Evelyn whispered into the dark, "You can rest now." The mountain answered with silence. Weeks passed. Investigators from the state came and went, curious about the discovery, respectful of the dead. The remains were buried beneath the oak tree near the ridge, where wildflowers had begun to bloom again. Evelyn carved their names into a wooden marker herself, her hands steady and sure. Lydia Cole, 1878-1887. Jacob Cole, 1880-1887. Finally home. Sheriff Granger attended the small ceremony. So did Martha Whitlow, holding a bundle of wild daisies. When it was done, Evelyn stood back, feeling the quiet fill her chest. "What'll you do now?" Granger asked. "I'll stay," Evelyn said. "The land's scarred, but it's still alive. I think maybe I can help it heal." Granger smiled faintly. "You're braver than most." Evelyn watched the sun slide through the trees, painting the grave in gold. Boone chased a butterfly near the stones, tail wagging. For the first time, laughter felt possible again. As they turned to leave, a whisper drifted through the branches, faint, childlike, carried by the wind. "Thank you." Evelyn, she froze, heart lifting, eyes wet with something that wasn't sorrow. The air shimmered, soft and warm, like sunlight through leaves. Then it was gone. Boone barked once, looking toward the ridge. Evelyn smiled. "Come on, boy," she said. "Let's go home." The two of them walked down the path toward the cabin, the mountain finally quiet, the ghosts of Hollow Creek at peace. Spring came early to the Blue Ridge that year. The snowmelt trickled down the gullies in silver threads, and the trees around Hollow Creek unfurled new leaves, green as hope. For the first time in decades, the mountain seemed to breathe again. Evelyn stayed. She could have left, returned to the city, or taken a job in Shenandoah. But she didn't. The cabin, once a refuge of grief, had become her anchor. She fixed the roof, cleared the brush, and built a small garden out back. Every morning she walked to the ridge with Boone, leaving a fresh wildflower on Lydia and Jacob's grave. The air there was always still, peaceful. By late May, she had begun keeping a journal, not of ghosts or guilt, but of the land. How the soil thawed sooner than before, how deer tracks now dotted the fields, how the birds had returned to the hollow. The mountain, she wrote, was healing. But every now and then, when the mist rolled down low at dusk, she still felt something watching her. Not malevolent, just aware, like the mountain itself was remembering her name. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the peaks, Evelyn sat on her porch with a cup of tea. Boone lay at her feet, half asleep. Fireflies blinked across the yard. The locket, now cleaned and polished, hung from a nail above the mantel inside. Catching the last orange light through the window, she almost didn't hear it at first, a faint sound beneath the whisper of crickets, a child's laughter. Soft, distant, carried on the wind from the ridge. Evelyn froze. Then she smiled. "Good night, Lydia," she said quietly. The laughter faded into the trees. Later that night, thunder rolled in from the west. Rain began to fall in steady sheets, drumming against the tin roof. Evelyn lay awake listening to it, her thoughts wandering. When lightning flashed, she caught a glimpse of the locket glowing faintly, like a heartbeat of gold in the dark. The next morning, Boone scratched at the door before sunrise. Evelyn groaned and rolled out of bed, pulling on her coat. Outside, the air smelled of wet pine and soil. The storm had passed, leaving the world silver with dew. Boone led her toward the ridge again, tail wagging but urgent. When they reached the clearing, Evelyn stopped short. The grave marker she had carved was gone. "Not broken, gone," In its place stood a young oak sapling, its trunk thin but strong, leaves trembling in the morning breeze. At its roots, two small stones glimmered, smooth and pale, carved by hand. She knelt, brushing dirt from them. The names were there, clear and clean. Lydia Jacob. Her breath caught. The soil around the sapling was undisturbed, as though it had always grown there. Evelyn reached out, fingers brushing the bark. It felt warm, alive. Behind her the wind shifted. For a moment she thought she heard footsteps, light ones, circling the edge of the clearing. Boone's ears perked up, but he didn't growl. Instead, he wagged his tail and looked toward the trees, eyes bright with recognition. "Are you here?" Evelyn whispered. The branches stirred. Sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling over the clearing like a benediction. And then, faint but unmistakable, a voice whispered, not from the trees, but from the earth itself, soft as breath through the grass. "Thank you for listening." Evelyn felt tears rise unbidden. "You're welcome," she murmured. Boone barked once, joyous, chasing a swirl of wind down the hill. Evelyn watched him go, her heart light. She knew somehow that the children weren't gone. They had simply become part of the mountain, part of the roots and rain and sky. By summer, Hollow Creek began to draw people again. Hikers, artists, wanderers. The air no longer felt haunted. It felt sacred. The sheriff came by once a month, sometimes to check in, sometimes just to sit on the porch and share coffee. Martha Whitlow brought honey and gossip. Life in its quiet, ordinary way had returned. But Evelyn never told anyone about the sapling. That was between her and the mountain. Sometimes, when twilight fell and the woods shimmered with gold, she'd stand at her door and listen, not for the bell, not for the storm, but for that faint laughter that drifted through the leaves. And every time she heard it, she'd smile and whisper back, "Sleep well, little ones." Then she'd turn inside, light the fire, and sit beside Boone. Evelyn stood on the porch of her cabin, the early morning light spilling across the Blue Ridge Mountains. The valley, long steeped in shadows and whispered secrets, finally seemed at peace. Boone's grave rested beneath a lone pine, a modest headstone marking the dog who had been her companion, protector, and guide through the darkness. Evelyn traced the rough wood with her fingers, remembering every loyal nudge, every growl that had warned her of unseen presences. She closed her eyes, allowing herself a quiet moment of grief and gratitude. The journal lay beside her, its leather cover worn and softened by years of handling, each page heavy with the truths she had unearthed. Every secret, every suppressed memory of Hollow Creek had led her here. She could still feel the pulse of the mountain beneath her feet, the echo of children's laughter that had long been silenced, and the faint lullaby that sometimes drifted. Through the pines, a soft reminder that Lydia's spirit had found its rest. The locket, buried alongside the journal, glinted faintly in the sunlight. Evelyn lifted it, brushing away the dirt that clung stubbornly to the metal. The small photograph inside, Lydia's innocent face, seemed to smile up at her, unburdened by fear or sorrow. For years, the girl's memory had been suffocated by silence, hidden by the shame and fear of a town unwilling to confront its own history. But now, through Evelyn's courage, the truth had been honored. A faint breeze stirred, carrying with it the rustling of leaves and the distant trill of a creek. It was almost musical, as if the mountain itself was sighing in relief. Evelyn listened carefully, remembering the nights of haunting whispers and Boone's low growls, the dreams that had pulled her deeper into the valley's past. Every shadow had a voice now, every tremor of the earth a reminder of lives left unfinished. And yet, there was no malice in it anymore, only peace. As she leaned against the porch railing, a new couple appeared along the trail, their curiosity drawn to the cabin that had sold for a mere $50. Evelyn observed quietly from her perch. They approached the structure slowly, unaware of the history buried within its walls. Their laughter and conversation were light, unburdened, contrasting sharply with the heavy silence she had known for so long. She watched them examine the cabin, flipping open the loose floorboards and discovering the buried journal and locket. The inscription on the church bell overhead caught their eyes. "Lydia sleeps." A shiver ran through them, not of fear but of wonder and reverence. Evelyn smiled softly, the weight she had carried for so many years finally lifting. Boone's spirit lingered in the morning light, a gentle presence rather than the vigilant guardian she had relied upon. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," a benediction for the companion who had never left her side, whose instincts had guided her through the valley's deepest secrets and kept her safe from dangers both human and otherworldly. The wind carried the faintest echo of the lullaby again, threading through the pines, brushing against the edges of the cabin. It was a sound of release, of cycles completed, of generations' sins laid to rest. Evelyn closed her eyes, allowing the music of the mountain to wash over her. She had lived fully in the valley's haunting, faced the shadows that lingered, and emerged transformed. The cabin, the journal, the bell, they were now her legacy, entrusted to whoever came after, a reminder that the mountain remembered but demanded only truth and courage. As the couple explored further, Evelyn stepped back into the light of the rising sun. The mountains stretched endlessly before her, serene and golden, the pines whispering in agreement with the breeze. Hollow Creek remained still, its secrets exposed, its shadows dispersed. She knew that one day the valley might again welcome new lives, new stories, but the echoes of the past would always guide those willing to listen. Evelyn breathed deeply, the crisp mountain air filling her lungs, and allowed herself a rare, full smile. For the first time in decades, the valley felt like a place of healing rather than sorrow. The whispers had ceased, the restless spirits had found solace, and Boone's vigilant presence was finally at peace. The mountain had remembered, and now it had stopped. She turned back to the cabin one last time, the journal in her hand, the locket nestled safely inside. A single thought crossed her mind, calm and unwavering. The mountain had endured. The truth had been honored, and peace, fragile, hard-won and eternal, was finally hers to witness. The mountain outside her window would hum with life, whole again. The ghosts of Hollow Creek were gone, not forgotten, but forgiven, and in the soft, endless song of the wind through the oaks, Evelyn Hayes finally found what she had come here for: peace. Autumn came softly to Hollow Creek, brushing the mountainsides with amber and rust. The oak sapling had grown taller, its leaves catching the light like burnished coins. Each day Evelyn watched it from the porch as she wrote in her journal, her handwriting steadier now, her thoughts no longer tangled with grief. Boone lay at her feet, aging gracefully, his muzzle graying, eyes still bright with quiet wisdom. The mountain had changed too. The air no longer pressed heavy on her chest. The silence that once felt suffocating now rested easy, like an old friend sitting close by the fire. Birds had returned, warblers, thrushes, even a hawk that circled the ridge every dawn. Evelyn felt their rhythm seep into her bones, a reminder that life, even after so much death, always finds its way back. But peace, she had learned, never comes without echoes. One morning, near the end of September, Evelyn went down to the old well beside the burned church site. The state had fenced it off months ago, planning to restore the land into a small heritage preserve. But the workers hadn't come back since the summer storms. There were whispers in town that equipment failed mysteriously, that photographs came out blank, that the mountain didn't want to be disturbed again. Evelyn didn't believe in curses anymore, but she did believe in respect. She set down a small bundle of dried herbs and tied it to the well's handle, a gesture she'd learned from Martha Whitlow, meant to keep the old spirits calm. The wind picked up, swirling leaves around her feet. For a moment she thought she heard a child's giggle again. Then it was gone. "Still watching, huh?" she murmured. Boone barked softly, tail wagging. They walked back toward the cabin, the trail lined with wildflowers and fading sunlight. The mountainside shimmered with quiet color, like the world itself was exhaling. That night, Evelyn dreamed again. The first real dream she'd had since the fire. She was standing in the forest, only it wasn't burned. The trees were alive, thick with green. The bell tower stood tall again, the cross gleaming in the sun. The church door creaked open, and two children stepped out, a boy and a girl, hand in hand. Lydia and Jacob. They smiled at her, the locket glinting at Lydia's throat. "Thank you," Lydia said softly. "But there's one more thing." "What is it?" Evelyn asked. Jacob pointed behind her. When she turned, she saw the mountain opening, the ground splitting like a breath, revealing roots that pulsed faintly with light. A voice, deep and ancient, rose from below. "Remember us all." Evelyn woke with a start, the echo still ringing in her ears. Boone stood at the foot of the bed, whining low. The air felt heavy again, not hostile but charged, like the calm before a thunderstorm. She lit the lamp and opened her journal, writing the words before they slipped away. Remember us all, but who was us? Lydia and Jacob? Or something older, something bound to the mountain itself? Over the next few days, Evelyn felt it, a subtle pull in the woods, drawing her toward the ridge where she'd found the sapling. She tried to ignore it, but it grew stronger, a quiet insistence that hummed beneath her skin. Finally, one cold October morning, she followed it. The air was crisp, the sky a pale gray. Boone trotted beside her, alert but calm. When they reached the ridge, Evelyn stopped, dead in her tracks. The oak sapling was no longer alone. Around it, in a perfect circle, new shoots had sprouted, smaller trees, perhaps a dozen of them, their roots intertwined beneath the soil. Their leaves shimmered gold despite the season's chill. She knelt and touched one. The bark felt warm, alive, pulsing faintly just like in her dream. "Lydia," she whispered, "is this you?" The wind stirred the branches, carrying a faint sigh. Then she saw something half buried in the dirt at the base of the largest sapling. An old photograph sealed in a glass frame, the edges charred. She dug it out carefully, brushing away the soil. The picture showed the church congregation from the 1880s, stern faces in Sunday best, standing before the bell tower. Evelyn's heart skipped. In the back row stood a man she recognized from one of the sheriff's old records, Reverend Cole, the preacher. His hands rested stiffly on the shoulders of two children, Lydia and Jacob, but behind them, barely visible, was something else, a shadow in the trees. Tall and indistinct, its shape bending toward the children like smoke. She traced it with her thumb. The shadow almost looked human. A chill crept up her spine. Evelyn took the photo back to the cabin. That night, she set it beside the locket on the mantel. As the firelight flickered, the glass caught a strange glint, and for a split second she thought the shadow moved. The flames crackled louder, like whispers. Boone lifted his head, growling softly, "Easy," she said, though her voice trembled. The locket swayed gently on its nail, chiming once like a bell. Then the sound faded. The next morning she went into town to see Martha Whitlow. The old woman sat on her porch, shelling beans, her eyes sharp despite her years. When Evelyn showed her the photo, Martha's face drained of color. "Oh, Lord," she breathed. "You found that? What is it?" Evelyn asked. Martha hesitated, then set the bowl aside. "They say the Reverend wasn't the first preacher here. Before him, this land was part of a revival camp. Old mountain folk used to gather here for worship long before any church was built. But not all their prayers were to God." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" "Some say the mountain had a spirit, a keeper. They called it the Watcher. When the Cole family built their church, they buried the old altar stone under the foundation. The Reverend thought he was purifying the land, but all he did was seal something ancient beneath it." Evelyn's breath caught. "And when he killed his children," Martha nodded grimly, "he bound their souls to that curse. The fire broke it, but it also woke what was buried. That's why you're still hearing them. The mountain remembers." Evelyn stared at the horizon through Martha's window, the peaks shrouded in mist. The words from her dream returned, low and resonant. Remember us all, not just Lydia and Jacob. All of them. The forgotten, the buried, the silenced voices swallowed by the mountain. What happens if I do? Evelyn asked quietly. Martha gave a small, sad smile. Then maybe it'll finally rest. That evening, Evelyn climbed the ridge one last time. The air was cold, sharp with the scent of pine and smoke. She carried the photograph and the locket in her hands. Boone followed close, his steps careful, as if he understood the weight of what she carried. When she reached the circle of trees, she knelt in the center and placed both objects at the roots of the oak. "I remember," she said softly. "All of you." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled, faint but steady. The wind rose, spinning through the leaves, until the entire grove shimmered with light. The locket's metal gleamed, and the photograph disintegrated in a slow, golden burn. Evelyn closed her eyes. She heard whispers, dozens of them, hundreds, layered like the sound of leaves in the wind. Men, women, children, all blending into a single voice that said over and over, "Thank you." When she opened her eyes, the light had faded. The trees were still. Boone pressed his head against her shoulder, whining softly. Evelyn smiled through her tears. The mountain had fallen quiet again, not empty, but whole. She turned toward home, the last of the light fading behind her. As she walked down the trail, she thought she heard the faint toll of a bell far in the distance, not mournful this time, but gentle, like the sound of peace settling over the land. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Hayes felt that she truly belonged, not just to the cabin or the ridge, but to the mountain itself. Years passed. The seasons rolled over the Blue Ridge Mountains like a slow, breathing tide. Snow to bloom, bloom to flame, flame to ash. The people who lived in the valley below spoke less and less of the Hollow Creek haunting. With time, the tragedy of the Cole family faded into history, softened into folklore told by park guides and whispered to curious tourists, but the mountain never forgot. Evelyn Hayes grew old in her cabin beneath the ridge. Her hair turned silver, her steps slowed, yet her eyes never lost their quiet strength. Boone, her faithful companion, had long since passed, buried beside the garden he used to patrol. In his place, a young shepherd named Scout kept watch, loyal and bright-eyed, sensing things Evelyn didn't always see. She'd become something of a legend herself, the woman who stayed. Children in town told stories that she could speak to ghosts, that she'd once faced the devil in the church fire and lived. Evelyn never corrected them. The truth, she knew, was stranger than any tale. Every morning she visited the grove on the ridge. The oak sapling had grown tall now, its roots spreading wide beneath the soil, joined by a circle of others that had risen around it like sentinels. Locals called it the Children's Grove. Some came to leave offerings, ribbons, stones, coins, for good luck. Others came to listen. They said that on quiet days you could hear laughter in the wind. Evelyn always smiled when she heard that. One late October morning, a young historian named Clara Granger, the sheriff's granddaughter, drove up to the cabin. She was researching a book on the lost mountain villages of Virginia. Evelyn greeted her with tea and a wary smile. "You look just like your grandfather," Evelyn said as she poured. Clara laughed. "That's what everyone tells me. He used to talk about you, you know. Said you were the bravest person he ever met." Evelyn's smile softened. "He was kind. Too kind to believe half the things that happened here." Clara hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I found something in the county archives. I thought you might want to see it." Inside was an old map, hand-drawn, its ink faded with age. Hollow Creek was marked at the center. But there were other names, too: Red Hollow, Pine Run, Saints Rest. Dozens of small settlements that no longer existed. Clara pointed to one just north of Hollow Creek. "There was another church here once," she said. "Built around 1850. It burned down the same year Reverend Cole arrived." Evelyn frowned. "Another church?" Clara nodded. "The report said it collapsed during a landslide, but there are no graves, no records of who built it. It's like the whole congregation vanished." The words settled heavy in the air. Evelyn felt the faintest prickle at the back of her neck. the same feeling she used to get before a storm. "The mountain keeps its secrets," she murmured. Clara smiled, unaware of the weight in her tone. "Maybe you can help me find it. Tomorrow, if you're up for a little hike." Evelyn looked out the window. The grove was swaying in the wind, the oak leaves flashing gold in the dying light. She hesitated, then nodded. Tomorrow. They started early, hiking along an old hunter's trail that twisted through the pines. The air was crisp, the forest quiet except for the crunch of leaves beneath their boots. Scout trotted ahead, nose to the ground. After an hour they came upon a clearing neither of them remembered seeing before. A flat expanse where the earth sloped strangely inward, like the top of a buried dome. At the center stood a ring of stone, ancient, blackened, half swallowed by moss. "This wasn't on the map," Clara said, crouching beside the stones. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. She brushed away the moss. Beneath it was a carving, faint but unmistakable. "To the watcher who guards what we forget." Clara traced the letters, eyes wide. "Watcher," like she never finished. Scout began barking furiously, hackles raised. The ground beneath them trembled, a low, deep vibration that rippled through the soil. The wind rushed down from the ridge, whirling through the clearing. Evelyn stumbled back, clutching Clara's arm. The stones pulsed with faint light. "Get back!" Evelyn shouted. The air thickened, humming like a living thing. Leaves rose in spirals around them, and for an instant Evelyn saw them. Dozens of faces in the wind, pale and translucent, their mouths moving soundlessly. "Not angry, not lost, waiting? Evelyn?" Clara gasped. "What is this?" Evelyn's voice shook. "It's the rest of them. The ones the mountain still keeps." The ground cracked open in the center of the ring, releasing a burst of cold air that smelled of rain and old stone. From the fissure came a sound like 1,000 sighs, weary, ancient, endless, and then just as suddenly it stopped. The forest stilled. The wind died. The light faded from the stones. When Evelyn opened her eyes, the clearing was silent again. The crack in the earth was gone, as though it had never been there. Scout whimpered softly. Clara turned to her, pale but steady. "What just happened?" Evelyn took a deep breath. "The mountain was reminding us." "Of what?" "That it's alive." They walked back in silence. When they reached the grove, the oak leaves were whispering, though there was no wind. Evelyn placed a hand on the trunk and closed her eyes. Beneath the bark she felt it, a pulse, faint but strong. "Did we make it angry?" Clara asked quietly. Evelyn shook her head. "No, it's awake now." "That's different," Clara hesitated. "Should we tell someone?" Evelyn smiled, weary but calm. "No one would believe us. Besides, it doesn't want attention. It just wants to be remembered." They stood together for a long time, the silence between them filled with something deep and old, reverence. "Maybe your warning." When Clara left that afternoon, Evelyn lingered at the grove. The light was soft and gold, filtering through the leaves. She whispered, "You can rest now. I've done what I could," and somewhere deep within the roots, something stirred. Not a voice this time, but a feeling, gentle and warm, wrapping around her like a sigh. That night, Evelyn sat by the fire, Scout curled beside her. The locket still hung on the mantel, glowing faintly in the firelight. She opened her journal to a blank page and wrote, "The mountain keeps its watch, not to haunt but to hold. Every root remembers. Every wind carries a name. The dead do not vanish here. They become the forest itself." When she finished, she closed the book and leaned back, listening. The old bell, or maybe its echo, rang once, distant and soft. She smiled. "Good night, Lydia. Good night, Jacob." Outside, the mountain whispered in reply, a long, low murmur that sounded almost like words. And then at last, there was silence. The fire burned low. The wind sighed through the oaks. Evelyn's eyes drifted closed, her breathing steady. By morning, the chair was empty, the fire cold. Scout lay beside her, slippers, unmoving but calm. When Clara Granger returned a week later, she found the journal open on the table, the final page written in a careful, steady hand. "The mountain remembers." And so do I, outside in the grove. A new sapling had sprouted beside the great oak, small, strong. and already reaching for the sun, somewhere in the high wind above Hollow Creek, a bell tolled once, then faded into the endless hush of the mountains, and the keeper kept its watch. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot. Evelyn traced the letters with her fingertip, then opened her notebook. Her old ranger habits had returned, the need to log details, to keep order against the unknown. She flipped through the pages she'd filled since moving in. Bell tolled at 12:17 a.m. Child's shoe and locket unearthed near the foundation of Old Bell Tower. Sheriff Granger evasive about Lydia Cole disappearance. Year 1972. Martha Whitlow claims Hollow Creek used to be company property. That last line had bothered her the most. Company property. But what company? Coal, logging. The records in town were too scattered to tell. Evelyn closed her notebook, slipped on her coat, and decided she'd get answers the old-fashioned way, by knocking on doors. The Whitlow farmhouse sat low in the valley, a weather-beaten skeleton of a home that smelled faintly of hay and kerosene. Martha answered the door with her shawl tight around her shoulders and suspicion in her eyes. "Back again, Mrs. Hayes?" the old woman rasped. "You ought to be careful poking around." "The mountain don't like to be stirred." Evelyn smiled politely. "I'm not stirring anything." "I'm just trying to understand what happened to that girl." Martha hesitated, glancing toward the fog that swallowed the ridge. "There are stories that ought to stay buried." "Maybe," Evelyn said softly, "but somebody buried her story for 50 years. And if that somebody was responsible for her death..." Martha's hand trembled on the doorframe. "You think this is about murder?" Evelyn nodded once. "I think the locket was left for someone to find." The old woman's lips pressed into a thin line. Then, with a resigned sigh, she motioned Evelyn inside. The parlor was a museum of dust and memory. Framed photographs lined the mantel, sepia-toned families in Sunday clothes, eyes blank, hands folded. Martha shuffled to a tin box by the hearth and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "I shouldn't be showing you this," she said, untying the cord, "but you ain't the first to come asking." Inside were letters, yellowed, fragile and bound by twine. The ink had bled in places, but the writing was clear enough. The first envelope bore the initials J.C. Evelyn's heart quickened. "Jacob Cole," Martha whispered. "He worked for the Hollow Creek Timber Company back in the 60s. Foreman's son, smart but mean when he drank. The girl, Lydia, used to run errands for his father, fetching mail, groceries, little things. Folks said Jacob took a fancy to her." Evelyn picked up one of the letters carefully. The date, March 4th, 1972. The handwriting leaned forward, impatient, almost feverish. "Lydia, you said you'd meet me by the bell tower at dusk. If you don't come, I'll come to you. You can't keep pretending you don't care. You said you loved me once, remember?" J. Evelyn's throat tightened. "These letters, where did you get them?" "They were in my brother's things," Martha said quietly. "He was the sheriff then. He found them after the girl went missing. The company wanted it quiet, didn't want bad press. Said she ran off to Roanoke. But she didn't." Martha shook her head. "No, she didn't." Evelyn turned over another letter. "This one was smeared with rain stains. Lydia, you can't keep me away. If you tell anyone, I'll..." The sentence cut off abruptly. "The paper was torn at the bottom. She was 16, Martha said. Jacob was near 30. His daddy ran half this county. You see where I'm going?" Evelyn did, and it made her stomach twist. "After she vanished, the company shut down," Martha went on. "Sold the land cheap. The church fell, the bell tower burned. Folks moved away. But some say Jacob never left, that he wandered those woods until the mountains swallowed him." Evelyn folded the letters carefully. "I need to see what's left of that bell tower." Martha's eyes widened. "No, you don't. The Earth's claimed it. Nothing up there but stones and ghosts." Evelyn met her gaze. "Then I guess I'll be visiting both." The climb was harder than she expected. The trail, long since forgotten, wound through moss-covered rocks and skeletal birches. Boone trotted ahead, his ears twitching at every rustle. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, no sound except her own breath. Halfway up, she found what remained of the bell tower, a circle of scorched stone and a rusted iron frame half buried in earth. The bell itself lay split beside it, the metal blackened as if struck by lightning. Evelyn crouched near the foundation. Something shimmered faintly in the soil. She brushed away dirt until her fingers struck glass, an old lantern, its handle twisted. Inside the cracked glass was a folded scrap of paper. She pried it open with her knife. To whoever finds this, she's in the creek. I'm sorry. Her breath caught. The ink had faded almost to invisibility, but the words were unmistakable. Boone whined low, pawing at the dirt near her boot. The ground gave a soft, hollow thud. Easy, Evelyn murmured, but her own voice trembled. She dug with her hands until she found wood, rotted, splintered. A small box. Inside was another locket, identical to the first. Only this one still had blood dried along the clasp, and beneath it a braid of hair, pale and brittle with age. Evelyn's vision swam. She sat back, heart hammering, and for a moment she swore she heard it, the faint chime of the bell drifting through the fog below. By the time she reached the cabin, night had fallen. Her clothes were streaked with mud, her hands shaking. She placed the new locket beside the old one. They matched perfectly, mirror twins.